ahead and start my first. Let me go ahead and start my first full meeting of the executive committee. And this is Friday, February 25th. Let's start with the call to order.
Yes, thank you. We'll call this meeting to order at 10:01 and roll call will be Chair Tyson.
Here.
Vice Chair Flagger.
Here.
Director Gibbons.
Here.
Director Elahi.
Here.
Thank you. And I'll note that Director Martinez-Beltran is currently absent.
Okay, thank you for that. And then let's move on to public comment. Do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda? I see we have 3 attendees, but I don't see any public comments. And so I will go ahead and say, not seeing any, we will close that. Thank you. And let's move on to the consent item. And let's look, and do we have anything that people wish to pull from the consent item, which is just the minutes? I don't see anybody wishing to do that. Do we have any comments on the consent items? Seeing none, do we have any comments from the public? Seeing none, let's go for a roll call vote on the consent call items.
If somebody could make a motion to approve.
Oh, I forgot that part. Would somebody like to make a motion to
So
approve?
moved, Flagger.
Second.
Yes. Thank you, Director Elahi. Now.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Let's go with the roll call vote.
Thank you. Chair Tyson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Flagger.
Yes.
Director Gibbons.
Yes.
Director Elahi.
Yes.
Thank you. And with Director Martinez-Beltran, that motion carries.
Very good.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to our regular calendar, item number 2. And we have several very interesting presentations, so I hope we're all up for that. And then we'll start off with number 2. Item number 2, our CEO report. Please proceed.
Thank
Mr.
you,
CEO.
Chair Tyson. I have 2 updates for you. This morning, the CC Power Board met at a special meeting and approved the second long duration storage contract. We had in this contract 6 CCAs participating. The previous contract you approved last month had 7. With the approval of this contract, we will now be bringing it to our respective JPA boards, and it'll be brought to you for the March board meeting for your consideration. The next item I will be bringing to you at the next board meeting, March, is a consent calendar item extending a contract with our scheduling coordinator, Z Global. They've been under contract with us for the last 5 years, and we're extending their contract. So those are the 2 items I just wanted to give you a heads up that's coming to you in the March board meeting. And that's the end of my report, Chair Tyson.
Great, thank you. And this item is just for discussion. Do we have any discussion or comments? Not seeing any, and not any from the attendees. I don't see any. So let's move on then to our reports, and we'll start with number 3, doubling down on decarbonization. And I believe we have a presentation. That would be Justin.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try to keep my presentation crisp so we have some time for discussion and keeping it in the window we have here. So bringing this back to you all, doubling down on decarb programs. Next slide. So this we will be bringing to the board next month for approval. The board approved $17 million in additional double down program funds last month. And this is on top of the normal programs budget that we have, which is about $6 million annually. And so we've put together some allocations and details based on discussion that we've had in the past with the board. And so we're bringing that back. And so today we're really looking for input from you all. Next slide. Just wanted to show the timeline today, or in March today, we'll be sharing these details, getting approval on the allocations and those details. And then again, this is building on input from the board that we got back in November in the discussion we had then, as well as sharing it with member agency working group and other stakeholders through that process. And then moving forward, we will be, going into sort of full program design phase, launching those programs and continuing to give the board periodic updates on what we're doing there, how those programs are going, and what direction they're headed. Next slide. I do want to emphasize, that we have laid out a variety of programs through the sort of normal $6 million per year funding level in the EVI Joint Action Plan, in the Building Decarbonization Joint Action Plan, in our strategic roadmap, or in our decarb strategy and programs roadmap, and through specific board allocations for targeted programs over the years. We really went back and looked at those to pull out these 5 programs that we presented to the board in November and discussed. And these are the ones where we want to double down. We think we can really amplify the impact we're going to be able to make by putting more funds into these programs that we had already identified and had been wanting to run. Next slide. Hopefully this one looks familiar. This is what we discussed back in November. It's kind of this theory of how we're approaching our programs. We want to get to widespread electrification. We need to get there quickly. We need to get there comprehensively. The kind of direct line from a program to achieving that at scale is a little harder to draw, but when you draw it through policy really is this lever that we feel is going to get us to that change at scale. And so with our programs, what we want to do is kind of build these pillars on the left. We need to show that they are cost effective, that products are available, et cetera. And so with our programs, we want to enable policy by either demonstrating that these are in place, learning what needs to be put in place so that policy can be adopted, or just supporting one of these pillars by providing incentives or something like that so that the policy again can move forward. And that's really the mechanism that we're going to use to get to scale. Next slide. All right, I'm not going to spend much time on this slide because we're going to go into the details of the programs on the subsequent slides, but this is the high level allocation breakdown for the 17 million. The 5 programs are here that I just covered, and you can see the allocations here on the right. Next slide. So starting with multifamily EV charging. So again, this would be building on the program we've already deployed, but it would be adding incentives to that program. So we have a technical assistance program, but we would be increasing and well, really deploying a lot of incentives through that. We think we could reach, maybe 40 properties, depending on the exact mix of L1 and L2 that they deploy and how many chargers they need at their site. And what we're excited about is this idea of, okay, let's put about half of it towards kind of conventional incentives or rebates, and put half of it into a direct install program, which would help us target tougher sites and affordable housing properties, because those are ones that often need more support as they go through the process. And that's something that we learned through some of our pilots that we ran in this space. And really what we want to do, kind of going down to the bottom here, how it will support future policy. We've observed that some existing incentive programs are hard for multifamily properties in particular to participate in. And so we want to see what we need to do to create an incentive program where they can participate, and then deploy solutions that we can learn from to inform what future policy might look like. What should we be requiring maybe for multifamily properties to install? What kind of technology mix, that kind of thing. Next slide. Whole building electrification. So this is one that we are planning to spin up through the Building Decarbonization Joint Action Plan, but we want to put additional incentives in, again, trying to push towards this whole building electrification idea, either through supporting pre-wiring, panel upgrades, or having folks make the decision to fully electrify right at the outset if that's possible for them. And so we would put a portion of the funding towards, again, kind of a conventional incentive or rebate program, 1 million for residential, 1 million for commercial, as well as pulling 2 million for a direct install program, again, targeting larger and affordable housing multifamily properties for some of the same reasons I just said for on the EV side. And this again, we're trying to learn what approach is really going to work. How do we need to communicate this to these property managers to help them participate in this? What kind of incentives do we need to put in place to kind of spur people to consider pre-wiring or whole building electrification rather than just a one-off appliance when they're making that kind of decision? Next slide. Reach codes 2.0, obviously this is a big priority for us already, but we're wanting to put additional funding in largely that would, on the reach code side, would support EV infrastructure incentives for affordable housing new construction. And so this is something that we kind of saw a little bit of in the reach codes 1.0 process, but providing these incentives can help make the new construction policy more palatable or more able to pass, because there are incentives available for affordable housing construction. So we're not kind of making the cost to install, or we're not making the cost of construction higher for affordable housing because we have these incentives available. And then on the existing building or pilot policy side, really putting some additional funding in place to help our cities explore any kind of existing building policy that they want to explore. So technical support, as well as providing maybe programmatic support. So you could imagine if a city wants to do a targeted existing building mandate, retrofit mandate, we could actually deploy a very targeted and tailored incentive program to help support that from a financial perspective. But really, we want to help those cities that want to kind of move forward on this, take some action so that we can learn about that for all of our cities. Next slide. Permitting simplification. So for this one, again, when we think about getting to electrification at scale and the number of heat pump water heaters we're going to need to install, or furnaces we may need to replace, this is really a removing friction from the system type of initiative, because we need it to be smooth and seamless for folks to be able to make this switch to electric technology and to do it at scale. And so we have basically what we're imagining for this is providing technical support for cities as they're looking into their permitting processes and where maybe things could be simplified, as well as maybe providing alternative pathways or research and analysis of other cities and other regions on how they handle some of these problems. So kind of some different things, but again, really working with the city staff to figure out what support is needed to sort of achieve these outcomes that we jointly identify. Next slide. Finally, this is the last one, accessible financing. This one's really important for scalability as well as for equity, because a lot of folks, are not going to be able to have the capital upfront to make some of these electrification upgrades. And so having financing programs that are in place and that are accessible to renters, to lower income households, really important. And so we're going to move towards, we're pursuing this tariffed on-bill financing concept, which is a really an intriguing one, and one we think could unlock a lot of these things, particularly for renters. As well as we're going to explore some alternate financing options, because we don't think it's a one solution fits all type of situation. It's going to take a lot of different ideas and approaches. Next slide. I also wanted to include here that I know the board, expressed a lot of interest in how we're incorporating equity into our program design. And so we have done that in the past. We've included that in terms of targeting multifamily properties already for our technical assistance EV charging program and in some other ways. But we wanted to create a equity framework, which we've put together, which will really guide in all of our program design moving forward. We're going to kind of have these steps that we can systematically follow to make sure that we are thinking through equity considerations, that we are engaging with the relevant CBOs and having this feedback loop so that we're sure that we are aware of the design decisions we're making and that we're reaching all of our customers. Next slide. Included just two quick examples here. So, I think you've all seen SVCE before, the Socioeconomic Vulnerability Index. That's really the key metric that we have developed. And so, just right off here in these call out bubbles, you can see that when you think about SVCE 4, which is our worst off quartile, about 45% of our CARE and FARA accounts are in that quartile, whereas only 8% are in the SVCE 1 quartile. And so thinking about a program that might reach SVCE 4 is maybe going to be different than the programs that reach SVCE 1. Next slide. Similarly, you can split this by housing composition. And so the big gray section of the pie is single family home, whereas the blue section of the pie is multifamily home. And so again, SVCE 1, the housing stock and where people live look a lot different than in SVCE 4. And so thinking about programs that can reach both audiences, very important. Next slide. Just bringing it back to this summary here, we've talked through these 5 programs, the allocations, and then these are the kind of high level key elements we'll be adding for each. So I'm not going to go into that further. Next slide. So today, again, we're just looking for kind of any discussion or input that you all have for us, feedback on these items, suggestions for when we bring it to the board, and kind of just quick reactions on this. So with that, I think the next slide is just discussion, so we can turn it back to you all.
Great, thank you, Justin, for that presentation. Let's see, do we have any suggestions from EC members? We'll start off with Vice Chair Flagger and then go on to Director Gibbons.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Justin, for that presentation. I am always so impressed with the SVCE staff where the board will give feedback on something and the next time they present to us, they've already incorporated it or highlighted it to let us know they hear us. So thanks, Girish and team. My question just generally has to do with outreach and communication. I mean, all these programs sound wonderful, and apart from the simplification program where I think Justin specifically said that they would be reaching out to our cities, with the other programs, I'm curious what the outreach looks like. Who are you communicating? Are you looking to the cities to help you get the word out about these programs? And as I'm asking this question, I'm also curious whether or not our previous programs over the years, if we have had full participation. So the word has gotten out where applicants have been able to take advantage of our programs 100%.
Yeah, so I can say a couple things. One is that, yes, we definitely, work with our cities. We have the member agency working group monthly where we meet with them and we talk about programs that we have, kind of opportunities for collaboration, either on a marketing front or even on a program design and implementation side of things. So there's definitely that chain. And so we have worked with city staff in the past as we market our programs. In terms of sort of participation levels, I guess was part of your question. And I think we have seen fairly good participation levels, but one of the key questions, I think, and as we work more on equity, is like, where exactly are those participation? Is that participation happening? And so that's something that we're still looking at a little bit more. And I think part of this equity framework is going to be building more relationships or stronger relationships with some of the CBOs so that we're also using those channels more frequently as we market these programs to kind of reach customers who maybe aren't getting our direct email or getting messages from the cities or something like that.
Right, and thanks, Justin, and just to follow up, even with the whole building electrification and the multifamily developments, are you reaching out or working with the cities to reach out to the developers and the managers for the existing buildings?
So we haven't launched that one yet, but we will. And for the EV charging technical assistance, yes, part of the outreach we did was to developers actually, and kind of, managers of multifamily property locations, things like that. So yeah, we try to follow all those channels. I think we actually joined the California Apartment Association as well to be able to go through that channel.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. And before we go on to Director Gibbons, I want to say welcome to Director Beltran. Nice to have you with us. And go ahead, Liz.
I think I have more comment than questions, so I will hold off until we do that.
Okay. Let's go on to Director Elahi then.
Thank you. I checked with NASA. I mean, you guys really went together and put a plan together to do the equity part of it. I just started thinking as we were going through this on the equity side, is it more equitable, quote unquote, to give EV charging facilities or subsidize those compared to doing the wiring or other things that help with the electrification process, especially for low-income individuals? They may not have EVs and they may not have Teslas or other cars. And so an EV charging might just be a redundant thing or maybe an overkill for those people. should we budget more, if we're really budgeting towards low-income people, maybe we need to move some of those funds to where they really benefit the low-income individuals. And also cities are being faced with providing housing for low-income and very low-income people. And they could probably use some of those funds to incentivize developers or others to build the income if they're getting those subsidies. So that was my question. Is there a way of doing that?
Yeah, I'll say that, I think we're expecting as we talk to more and more of the CBOs and more folks in these communities, we'll be able to make sure that the way we're designing our program is going to work. Our programs is going to work for them. And so I think part of your question really is, we don't want to install EV charging somewhere where no one actually goes and gets an EV, but at the same time, EV ownership, as long as you have access to reliable and fairly cheap charging, saves you money. I mean, the total cost of ownership is better. And so we, of course, want to support those residents in being able to take advantage of this sort of economic improvement. One of the things that we learned from the Ecology Action EV charging pilot that we ran is that pairing the EV charging installation with tenant outreach and awareness and support for applying to the various statewide EV rebate programs, particularly for low income folks, seems like a really powerful and helpful step to actually not just install the chargers, but get those chargers used and have people actually purchase the EVs without needing to put much capital out there. So I think that is part of what we're trying to do with this, is we want to reach all communities, all of our residents with all of our programs. So on the EV side, as well as on the building electrification side. And I think we're hopeful that in the program design, we're going to be able to do that by incorporating some of these elements. So I think your question is a really good one because we need to be considering it, and we are considering it. I think that the way we've allocated it seems reasonable within that, as long as we are making some of those design decisions so that we are following up the installation with some of these other pieces that maybe the low income or SEVI 4 residents need. And we might not have that in a program if it was just targeting SEVI 1 quartile.
Okay, yeah, and it's difficult to design it, but as long as you guys, that should really be the front and center priority of the design. That if you're subsidizing, the funds should, as much as possible, go to people who really need them.
Yeah.
And if you're subsidizing things that they don't really can't really afford, and I guess maybe EVs are going to get cheap enough in the next 5-10 years, so most people will have, and they'll be required to have EVs anyway. So it may, long-term wise, I mean, that makes sense also. But as we go forward and long-term wise, we'll have more money later on, maybe to do something else. So I would suggest keeping that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director, for your comments. Let me just go ahead and with my question. I noticed we started off with the $20 million and you outlined 17 million in spending. Is the 3 million that we did, is that item number 5 on our agenda? Did we call that out? I just wanted to be clear. So we pulled out 3 million separately for customer relief. That's right?
Correct.
Great. Okay. And so then my question is, I think you've got a nice portfolio of actions here that will hit in a bunch of different areas. You're casting a broad net. And I'm just wondering, so let's say whole building electrification is a flop and we just get nothing happening and we don't really spend that money. Do we have the, and this is through the middle of 2024, do we have the ability in this to pivot? And let's say accessible financing, I just chose that one, is really popular and we use up all the money. Do we have the ability to stay with the 17 million and shift the spending rather than just say, well, that didn't work?
Yes, I think with a major reallocation in funds, we would just come back to you all and say exactly what you just said. Hey, we tried this, it didn't work for X and Y reasons, but this one is just doing such great business. We'd really like to put more of the resource into there and just let you know.
Great. Well, then I would just suggest that you add that to your presentation to say, this is what we're going to do, it maybe at the halfway point and say what we're going to do. I don't see any other questions, so I'm ready to go to Director Gibbons with the comments.
Okay, thank you. As Nisa said, it's great to have this feedback so direct to the board and all the way through today's presentation. So thank you to Justin and everybody. Regarding Nisa's comment, the success of the outreach programs and how much we're 100% subscribed comes full circle around to what we were just talking about. I think, and it ties into Javed's question about EVs. I think we need a little bit more metric data saying we've done this many projects, this many whatever across the county among cities. It's typically at a council level. You know, I always say this, coming back, we're elected officials. We like metrics because it helps us define accountability. So when Javed was talking about, you were talking about the pilot program in EV, it seemed to me that some metrics would be helpful to include in the presentation. I also was thinking outreach, tying back to Nisa and Javed both, was the nonprofit developers. Not just developers, but nonprofit developers, of which there's a good dozen that are very effective in our communities. I think would be great. And I've just made a connection with one of them and I'll share that later on. But I think that would be good because, as I think someone, Javed just said, we are all in doing our housing elements, and the volume of affordable units is going to be so critical. And the affordable developers are the ones that are going to be heavily involved. So I think that would be a really good thing. Okay. I would offer slides 2 and 3. I think you could combine. There was a little duplication of information there on your early slides. So I think you might benefit from seeing those. And I'm being nitpicky here. Your graphic on page slide 4 has a picture of the 2020 strategic plan, joint action plan. Do we have, is it something that says 2021? I want to make sure we have all the right pictures and dates between 2020 and 2021 if anything got reissued. So comment there. For the building departments and working with the cities, I wanted to mention that on your schedule, where's your schedule? I don't want to jump ahead of the other presentations. The cities have, where's this thing here? I think you have a schedule, but it might be on another presentation. Be aware that the city workloads this year are very, very intense. And the lead time to get anything on an agenda is quite long. So you really need to be very thoughtful about getting someone within the city staff, as well as the council member directors here, to make sure you have the lead time. And one of the other things that happens is you have legal review by council, by city attorneys. Let's see. You might also want to do something with matching with county funds. It would be very good if some of these programs could connect in with other programs that are providing funding. There's an awful lot of EV funding programs out there, and you might find some opportunities there. Let's see, slide number 10. Which slide number 10? Yeah, permitting simplification. You also, during the pandemic, a lot of cities went to online permitting, and it would be helpful to know who's gone online and what online system they're using, because it'll make a difference in how you recommend going forward. I know the permitting system that we had, I think they've solved it, but at one point, if someone was installing a heat pump hot water heater, they had to do 2 permits, one for electrical and one for water, and had to pay double fees. So there's a lot of hiccups in the transition to online permitting. So as you work with different cities and staff, that would be helpful. And on your slide number 14, it might be interesting to add another pie chart that talks about renters versus homeowners. Okay, I think that may influence where your quartiles discussion is, because it's more likely to be renters that will be involved in some of the programs that might help targeting your groups. So I think that's all I have on this one. Thanks.
That's a lot to think about. Justin, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I think, we'll take that. I think some of those comments, Director Gibbons, are going to be super helpful as we get more and more into the program design details, because I think, some of those comments and questions are really I think going to need to be in the forefront as we start talking to cities and moving forward on some of it. And then, definitely appreciate some of your suggestions on the slides and other things to highlight in the presentation.
And I think there's one slide in your appendix that I thought would be good to put in the slide, which is where's the slide that says we have this much money from our regular 2% and we're adding to it to this much. I thought the context of that was really important, because I don't think everybody necessarily understands that this is additive
To the $6 million that we have already.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I see him nodding his head, so I think he's got that. And so thank you, Director Gibbons, for those thoughtful comments. And then I saw also Director Beltran, your hand has been up very patiently, and I have to say, your vineyard background is mesmerizing.
Well, thank you. It's my open invite for everybody to come to Morgan Hill and drink some wine with me. I wanted to comment on a couple. I did have a question. One of them, I'm really looking at kind of the EV chargers, and if we start with slide 11, I wanted to understand a little bit more. You talked there about supporting renters' ability to participate in the programs. I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about which particular programs. And I'm sorry, I raised my hand just as we were finishing the question. So if you can't entertain the question, that's okay.
I'm happy to entertain the question. Am I allowed to entertain the question?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. So I think the exciting thing about the concept of tariffed on-bill financing is that you can apply it to almost any upgrade work that is done. And so it can be applied. I think we probably will be starting with heat pump technologies. So heat pump water heater and heat pump HVAC, but it could be extended to, EV charging infrastructure, things like that, and could actually do whole building electrification. It's really just a repayment mechanism. And so if we can kind of figure out some of the programmatic elements and how to deploy it, how to talk about it, how to make sure that there are appropriate consumer protections on it, things like that, it could extend to anything. And so that would then allow renters to participate in all kinds of programs.
Okay, so I'm wondering if we could do some outreach there with maybe renters insurance, or, where I'm at in Morgan Hill, many of our renters are in single family homes. I'm imagining that that's the same for many of you as well. And, quite frankly, I think that they're a great target market for us to look at in converting to EV vehicles. But there's a couple of different complexities that I see happening with that. One is that as we've had ADUs grow, we also, I was just reading about this yesterday, where many people have converted their garages into another room. So there's no garage for them to, drive into and use for their car charging. And so for us, we have an online business, and our garage is dedicated to that. And so I'm wondering if there's, some way that we could, one, kind of bolster up on the renters and seeing if we can reach out and make sure that they know and landlords know that this is something they could ask for and get reimbursed for. And then two, if we can make some exceptions for, you've lots of multi-generational homes. You also have people who are kind of, maybe renting out a studio. They've converted the garage to studio. So is there something that you can do for EV charging kind of outside of the garage area? Which, it's just not traditional access that we have, but it's something that I know a lot of people are doing, especially where we live, and it's so very expensive.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm wondering, have we thought about that? Has there been conversation about that?
I don't think we have fully about designing, an element of our program around that, but I think that's part of what we're hoping to do more through the equity framework approach, and kind of making sure that we're, including some of that in program design. I think in some respects, what you're describing is similar to the multifamily charging challenge, where it can be difficult, particularly to install charging at the location. Maybe it's because there's not a garage, maybe it's, something like that. The electrical infrastructure is still in place in the single family homes. And so, if you have the driveway, maybe you can still have a charger there, but you're right. I mean, it's an additional challenge maybe.
Yeah.
And so as we think about, where we're putting our support, and if it's an incentive thing, or if it's a education and awareness thing, or if it's a public EV charging near some of these, homes, so that folks are able to use that. Like, I think those are all approaches that we're going to keep considering as we deploy these programs.
Yeah, I really want us to kind of keep that open. I know, I have to rethink things. I mean, because now I am a renter. I have a young family. I rent. It's a hard lifestyle. You have no control really over what's happening. We've had to move at no fault of our own, but people sell and buy. And I think this is a real question for families. If you are in a multifamily development, are you going to really buy, and you can afford maybe to get the EV? Are you going to invest in that when you don't know? You might have to move. And then is there going to be an EV charger where you're going? So that's something that I know, is a real issue for people. And it's kind of like having a pet. If you have a pet and you're renting, what do you do with the pet if you have to move and you can't take the pet with you? So, and I think these are challenges that we're really, now as we're in a position where we really can start to leverage and encourage people to transition. We've got to think about those barriers, that are kind of non-traditional, and how we're going to work through them. So I think there's one area where we've got, financing, and that's part of it, but there's also lifestyle, and that's another part of it, and just kind of meshing those two. So I'm just hoping that, and I'll tell you, growing up, like I said, you have your home, and everything is there for you and built the way that you want. But as a renter, it's been a very different experience. So, and then I would just say, what do I have here? I have slide 13. If we're looking at slide 13, I was wondering if we could get maybe for the meeting a breakout. I had a lot of questions as I was looking at that, like where specifically is that geographically? What cities is it? What area is it? So if we could get maybe that, breakout, that would be really helpful. And then if we could also look and see, I know you have the different accounts, but I think Director Gibbons was also saying, if we could look at what's kind of happening in that area, what is it that they might be most in need of, so that we can look, and maybe as you suggested, we have to have different focuses in different areas that we're at. And that was really, I think, all that I had on this. I did like also on slide 14, if there was any way to get a breakdown of renters, that would be great too. Thank you so much. This is awesome.
All right. Well, thank you, Director Beltran. I think we've heard from the panelists. So let's see, is there anybody in the attendees that would like to comment on the presentation or the content? Give you a second there to take a look at that. And I'm not seeing anything. And so I'll bring it back and just I think this is for discussion, and I hope Justin and the CEO of Alessandra, that you got the kind of feedback you're looking for.
Yep.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you everybody for a very robust discussion. With that, let's move on to our item number 4, which is the update on the new construction reach codes. This is also for discussion, and I believe our presentation is by Zoe. Welcome, Zoe.
Hi, everyone. Dawn is actually going to kick us off and then hand it over to me.
Great.
Yeah, good morning, directors. So a couple of points of context here. Of course, our Reach Codes 1.0 effort over this last few years has arguably been SVCE's most impactful program, all in. 12 of our 13 communities adopted Reach Codes, and our board members were just essential in this, because ultimately it's our board members who are leading these conversations with their respective councils or boards, and we just wouldn't have been able to accomplish this without the board, every single board member very involved. So as we embark here on Reach Codes 2.0, which is kind of what we've conveniently been calling it, we want to make sure that we have the board really engaged. We don't want there to be any confusion about the timeline that we're on and what we're trying to accomplish here, because your help in this is just essential. So that's kind of the reason we're presenting this. We want to give you a status on where we are. We want to talk about key milestones, some important items that need to be accomplished here over the next few months in the context of work throughout 2022. So if we can go to the next slide. And in our conversations that we've had with you all over the last month or two, one of the things that really came out of this was Reach Codes 2.0 is really two things. Firstly, it's extending, for many of our communities, the Reach Codes that were implemented against the 2019 code for the 2022 code to become effective in 2023. So most of our communities are going to have to re-up their Reach Codes this year to ensure that they continue to be effective and perhaps are extended or expanded in some way for 2023. So we're on a strict timeline here as it relates to Reach Codes against the 2022 code, and that's going to be the primary focus of what we talk about today. At the same time, we want to start thinking about this brave new world of existing buildings, because at the end of the day, most buildings are existing, right? Not all that many new buildings get built each year. That was an important place to start, but we have to move to existing buildings. And so we want to begin to think about policy that can help us with electrification in an existing building context. This is a strategic effort, and we're definitely going to spend time this year getting going on that. doesn't have to be on exactly the same timeline as item number 1, the reach codes for new construction, but it's really arguably bigger and even more strategic than new construction reach codes. So that's the context here. Zoe is our point person for reach codes, but we have a lot of people focused on this. Towards the end of her presentation, she'll show the various folks that are involved in their roles. But Zoe's on point. So with that, Zoe, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. I think go to the next slide. Okay, and to spin off of what Don said, we really want to make sure that there's all of you are really up to speed on what we're doing, as well as all of our member agency staff. So we, we've done individual meetings, but here's the update as it stands now. So on the new construction side, which again is going to be the focus of today's conversation, our consultants at TRC have drafted model reach code options for both buildings and EV charging for 2022. We've held individual meetings with the majority of our board directors and alternates. We really enjoyed those conversations. They were engaging, inspiring. Don and I learned so much, so thank you for that. Those really focused on goals and strategy. We've also begun meetings with individual at staff level with each of our jurisdictions. We've actually, as of today, we've done 4 individual meetings with jurisdictions, and we will continue to schedule the additional 9. We have scheduled presentations with the City Managers Association and the Cities Association for April. So Garish will be presenting on reach codes to those groups. And we held already 4 public workshops in February. Those were region-wide workshops that we held in conjunction with PCE and EVCE. On existing buildings, just a quick update to note, so you know there's progress happening. I think we're like in the stealth mode period here. So we're doing some technical feasibility analysis of the policy options, looking at kind of the technology and the economic feasibility for policy options. And we're beginning to design a community workshop, region-wide workshop for the end of March with TRC. And this effort is, existing buildings, it's about technology and economics. It's also really going to be community outreach heavy. It's going to be a lot of that coalition building. So we're doing thinking about those 2 things in conjunction. And then I think we already talked about today's presentation, really review of what we're doing, describe again our resources, and outline the next steps. Next slide, please. So again, a way of saying thank you for your input was essential to 2019, and it was going to continue to be essential. We know how many priorities you have on your calendar all the time, but particularly this year, you all have a lot going on. So thank you for your time and your input. It strengthens our collective efforts, right? We're here to facilitate, but this is really your leadership. So thank you very much. Next slide. All right, and so we've said this in each of the individual meetings, but we wanted to say again that what we did in 2019 in this region, what you all did, it made an impact and is improving, of course, the carbon footprint of your jurisdictions, public health of your community members, but the impact has gone well beyond our borders, right? The statewide code is now in 2022 has taken many steps beyond what they otherwise would have done because jurisdictions like yours demonstrated the feasibility and political readiness to move towards greater electrification. So this is what we accomplished last time, well beyond the goals that we set. And we look forward to having the same level of success and even more in this next cycle. Next slide. Okay, this is the timeline, Director Gibbons, I believe that you were referring to. I was thinking about you when we developed it too, actually. I knew you'd have good insights. So first, we put together this timeline because we want to be clear, right? As Don said, that there's a strict milestones that need to be met. We want to make sure that things go so that there's no lapse in the code cycle. in January. We also understand each jurisdiction is going to have specific times that work for them. Like cities tend to have a date month that they normally do the statewide code adoption. So we're happy to work as we're doing individual city meetings to adjust and develop a specific timeline. We did that with the city of Gilroy already. But at a high level, this will look very similar and generally for each jurisdiction. And you can see here, we're in this define goals, agendize, engage staff, and define approach as the key things to be working on. And by goals, we mean what do you want to accomplish with the new construction reach codes? Is it re-upping what you did in the last cycle? Is it adopting a code for the first time, either on new construction or EV charging? Is it enhancing what was adopted last time, perhaps including cooking if cooking wasn't included, or including additional building types? This is the time to really think through what those goals are. Agendize, making sure, as to the point, Director Gibbons, there's a lot of things on the calendar this year, so making sure that this is on for vote in the fall, and if additional council info sessions are needed, that those are also agendized in time, enough ahead of that vote to bring the right information, and then for things to be updated. And that will depend a little bit on what's going on in your city and what you plan to do with the reach code. Engaging the key staff, so building officials, sustainability contact, community development director, city manager, of course, getting us on the work plan. And then defining approach. This is a bit more of a technical, wonky one, but we want to just put this here. In the last code cycle, most of our jurisdictions did a reach code that updated a section of the energy code, and very well likely would like to follow that same process. The city of Morgan Hill adopted an all electrification municipal ordinance amendment that uses police powers instead of their powers over building cycle. Some jurisdictions might decide that they want to do a different approach than they did last time. We're here to support whichever one works for your jurisdiction. That's likely a conversation between with the building official and staff and leadership. But we just want to note that it's important to have that piece in place because logistically matters how you follow forward. We have these letters of interest. Folks might recall from the last round, we have individualized letters which we will be sending out to city managers, and also our member agencies will be helping to shepherd those through the process. And those letters of interest let us know that your jurisdiction is interested, planning to bring a code for a vote, and to send us a letter later requesting the $10,000 grant information. Our suggested target there is to have those complete by the end of April, and we'll be circulating them in the next couple of weeks, open to input on exact timing there. And then of course, there's the writing of the code language, the customization, conducting outreach, and then bringing the information to the council ahead of times for council info sessions, bringing that final code to a vote. Depending on that approach you choose now, there's potentially CEC submittals that need to happen. And then all of that, assuming goes together, and then the updated code would be effective on January 1st, 2023. Just looking to make sure I didn't miss any key things. I think I covered everything. Happy to answer questions that come back. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, we're here to help facilitate and support your efforts all along the way. And this is a summary of the key actions for each of your jurisdictions, and then the resources that we have available in-house and through our consultants. And so I'm going to focus mostly on the two columns to the right, our resources. So we are here at SVCE to help with meeting facilitation. That can be internal, or it also could be if there's external stakeholders you want us to help to coordinate. We have right now built out our in-house technical expertise Peter Mustasich has got great details both on codes and building technology to provide that kind of support and answer questions. We can coordinate and facilitate workshops for electeds. There was an elected officials workshop that was really successful, I've heard, in the last code cycle, something that we can do again. We can always address technical questions that come up from staff or leadership or from community members. If you're getting questions, we're happy to help field those questions. Of course, the $10,000 grant in recognition of the staff time. And we're there to support and be there for council presentations and answer questions. Our consultants at TRC can help to draft model codes. They are leading region-wide workshops. So those are in addition and above to the specific local workshops that we can do in outreach. They also can support your jurisdiction level presentations with key community members and stakeholders, and support reach code customization, and also provide council support presentations. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of this is repetitive, you'll see, because we just want to hone in on the message with so many things going on, right? Where we are now, the key critical next steps at this point in the cycle are defining that goal, the level of reach, identifying key staff contacts, determining the approach, making sure that this is on the agenda for fall, and having the city manager sign that letter of interest. Next slide. And as Don mentioned, right, we're here to help. We're really excited to have a full team now that's providing so much support and so much different kind of support. Emails are here, and you're welcome to reach out to anyone on this list with specific questions. If you're wondering who you should reach out to, or you want help, you're also happy to reach out to me, and I can either answer the question directly or make sure you get the right resource in your hands. But really excited, right? We've got Tony Yulo on board. We've got Peter here with the technical lead. We've got Pam and Benna helping us with outreach. And of course, Don continuing to provide that strategic support and the technical folks at TRC. So a lot of capacity. Next slide will be my last. So in summary, most jurisdictions will need to re-up their reach codes to remain in effect. Morgan and Hill Campbell took a different approach. However, there's an opportunity there to focus on EV reach codes in this cycles. Immediate next steps around goals and approach, engaging staff. We're here to help, and just thank you. Thank you again. Your action is really inspiring, and we're lucky to get to work with you. And that's all my presentation. I'm happy to take questions, comments as needed.
Well, thank you, Don and Zoe, both. And let's go ahead. I see we have an attendee comment, but we'll start with the executive committee here. And you know what? I don't need to be that formal. If you have either comments or questions, you could please raise your hand. And let's start with Director Beltran.
Thank you. Oops, I'm trying to put my video on. There we go. Thanks, Zoe, for that. I really appreciate it. And I loved meeting with you guys and learn some stuff myself. I'm wondering if there's any way that we could get, and I'm talking a little selfishly here, Morgan Hill, but maybe even the others who, get some data on what impact we had this past year. So if we had, a multifamily development that went up that did not have any gas in it, how many units was that, so that we could actually bring that and share that as well. That's all I have. Thanks.
Great. And the answer is we are working on that. We would have loved to have that our evaluation done sooner. But however, collecting the data piece so that we can get that information is taking longer just to develop the strategy and figure out each jurisdiction, how their permitting data is collected is a bit different. So it's something that we're working on right now with our evaluation consultant. And we should be able to have an update on timing in a few weeks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And how about let's go to Director Gibbons.
Thank you. I am obviously very excited about this program moving forward. Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to reinforce metrics. Anything that you can find that provides some kind of metrics is really good. I also think it helps with publicity if we want to emphasize this in some newspaper articles or letters to the editor kind of thing. So metrics are great for all of us. I will send you some information about New York City, which was the first city in 2017 to require existing buildings to cut their greenhouse gases and expand their electrical. So that's going to be hopefully fascinating. It was fascinating for me. When you do, I think the letters of interest are really important. And would you CC all the board members when you send it to the city manager? Because that will encourage and make us aware of talking with our city managers to make sure they opened it and make sure they're going to reply to it. We can get on their case, as the phrase goes. And the other, let's see, ADUs. One of the things that would be interesting is have different cities apply this to ADUs. The development of ADUs has been increasing rapidly. And I think we want to make sure that the REACH codes apply to ADUs. And then in particularly conversions of ADUs, and new ones probably yes, but still awareness of that, that's a big topic of conversation. And then when you do the letter of interest, I think it would be, I've mentioned this a couple of times, if there's a way to encourage discussion between several cities where they could all have the same information, the same forms, the same whatever, where they could share staff. I mean, one of the things cities are looking for is how to economize on staff. And yet we have to be responsive to these. I think we have an automatic turnaround by state law. So if there's a way to have cities join together, just ask a question. Would you be interested in having a similar codes and staffing with other cities? And for example, the West Valley cities are Cupertino, Campbell, Saratoga, Los Gatos, and Montecito. And I know each area has their own little group. So just as an FYI, and that also might give you a little extra synergy and energy to move this forward. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm pretty sure you got all that. Let me just make a couple of comments. Let me just make a couple of comments here. And one of them is on slide 6. You know, you're showing the schedule for the year. I think it would be helpful if you put the year on that slide, just in case somebody's looking at it, a freestanding sort of thing. The other thing is, in terms of the REACH codes, I don't know about others, but my sense is I'm going to get no pushback on extending what we've got. The real question and the thing that's open for me is, are we extending it to major remodels? And if so, how do we define those? So I just want to tell you, that's what I'm most interested in. And in that context, I noticed that you're going to have entities voting in September and October, and many people, including me, are up for re-election. And so I'm not even saying what to do about that. It's just good to know about the timing. If it turns out that we've got something controversial, how do we anticipate what reactions might be? So those are my comments, and I think I'll switch over to the public, where Mr. Carney's been waiting so patiently. I'm going to ask him to join in here. And Bruce, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks very much. And Zoe, could you show us slide 6 again, please? For those of you who don't know about my history with respect to the REACH Code 1.0 effort, Carbon Free Mountain View, which I lead, was the organization that provided most of the public comment, not just in Mountain View, but in cities throughout the county. Dash Leads from the Sierra Club was also very important. And a former SVCE employee, John Supp, was just brilliant in providing information to city councils. My concern about the timeline here is that 3 years ago, which was not an election year, to Mr. Tyson's point, SVCE had the model code language completed by the end of May. And yet, I believe the first vote to approve a REACH code took place in the very last week of October. I know that Mountain View didn't approve its REACH code until November 12th, And I'm under the impression that Mountain Dew is either the second or third city to approve it. Obviously many councils take a full month break in July or August, and some may take more than a month. And so I think it's really important to try to pull 2 full months out of the right code language conduct outreach block so that you can pull other things forward. It's possible that council info sessions might be able to take place even when the council is not meeting. A couple other things I wanted to talk about. It would be very useful and not too hard to compare the membership of current councils to the membership of the councils that adopted REACH codes in 2019 and 2020, and see how many new council members there are who've never been asked to think about this or vote on this. And by the same token, it would be good to know in what cities the current sustainability staff members worked on REACH 1.0, and in which cities this will be new to the staff members as well. I would anticipate that there will be more public opposition to REACH 2.0, not just because it goes farther, but because there's more publicity about it. I would have to say that 3 years ago, with the exception of Los Altos, there really wasn't much pushback about REACH codes. And why is that? Because they focused only on buildings that hadn't been built yet, for which there's no constituency. But once you begin to enact changes that apply to major remodels or to non-remodels through replace on burnout or other things like that, all of a sudden the opposition has will grow tremendously. And so those are my thoughts. I'm happy to engage with SVCE on this, but I really do think you need to pull up the schedule.
Thank you for those thoughts, Bruce. Very strategic ones. Just by way of perspective, it's interesting because I recall this so clearly. In my community, we had 14 speakers all against the REACH code, and we voted for it without any question. And I think one of the things that we've learned is our Environmental Initiatives Committee in town then mobilized, realizing what could have happened. And so they've been more outwardly focused to provide support for something rather than sitting back passively. And I think that's probably a good tip for others as well. So I'll bring it back to the Executive Council. And do we have any further comments? And do you feel, Zoe and Don, did you get enough feedback to help you with your presentation to the full board?
Yes, extremely helpful. And thank you, Bruce. Great input from the community as well. So we'll reflect
Great.
that.
And then I do see a hand up from Vice Chair Flagger. Go ahead.
No, thank you, Chair, and thanks Zoe and Don for the presentation. I really appreciated Bruce's comments as well. I just wanted to underscore the point about staff support, because, a lot of us, as you know, a lot of our cities are challenged with staff vacancies currently. And so even with this aggressive timeline, which I think it's the right approach, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we may need more SVCE staff support this year than we did a couple of years ago. And I know you were right by your side a couple of years ago, but we may need you in the front for a couple of these things this year. So thank you.
All right, very good comments. With that, I think we've heard from everybody and we're ready to move on. I have my other class, but I think we can do this item 5 within 15 minutes. And so let me stay for that. And Vice Chair Flagger, be on tap to, maybe you're gonna have to run item 6 if you think you're up for that. So let's proceed with item 5, which is requesting recommendation on how to allocate the aforementioned $3 million in customer relief.
Yes, I think item 5 can move quickly here. So as you recall, at the last board meeting, the board wanted to have $3 million of this $20 million number allocated to customer relief, and the balance 17 million going to programs. And it was then requested that staff come back with a recommendation on how to distribute that $3 million. So we have a few options for you here and a recommendation. So next slide, please. This just goes through some background. You recall in 2020, we did something similar, and this was COVID relief our COVID relief effort at the time, we credited all of our CareFira customers, 26,000 at the time, with $100 in two $50 increments. We also had a program for small businesses. So we mailed out to small businesses, and then if they felt they were impacted, they got back to us and were eligible for a $250 bill credit. We did about 3,000 of those. So that was a couple of years ago now, but we're looking, I think, really at a very similar type of motion this time around. So next slide, please. So 3 basic options. The first would be to do a one-time direct bill credit of $100 to all of our CareFira residential customers. And that would equate to very nearly $3 million because we have close to 30,000 CareFira customers now. That $100 would definitely make a difference as it relates to the average increase in an electric bill that our CareFira customers are seeing. We're seeing an increase of about 13 to 15% in what our customers generally will be paying in March for electricity all in. And that $100 spread over a year pretty nicely offsets that new increment in their electric bills. So we could do the $100 once. Option 2 would be to spread that out over a number of months. So an example would be, say, over 8 months between April and November of 2022, a $12.50 credit each month. Option 3 would be to actually create a discounted rate for CareFira customers, and that rate would be, plus or minus 15% lower than it is today. And over the course of a year, that would result in the same $3 million in savings across CareFira customers. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides here that just talk about the pros and cons of each of these real quickly. And tipping our hand here, we like number 2 the best. We think it's the easiest and probably most visible. So next slide, please. So option 1, doing a single credit. This is very easy. We could do it very soon. The impact would go out in the community right away. But that credit is a one-time thing. It would likely be in excess of what that customer's SVCE bill is that month. So some percentage of that money is going to be covering other parts of the PG&E bill and not necessarily drawing down on obligations to SVCE. So a credit to the customer nonetheless, but more generally applied. So inexpensive way to go, but not optimal in that respect. Next slide, please. If we went with the multiple credits over multiple months, again, same dollar amount in the end, but visible in that it appears on 8 successive bills as a credit from SVCE. So more likelihood that the customer would see it. In any case here, we'll be sending out letters to our customers announcing this, but it'll be on the bill over that period of time. And that credit amount is likely going to be credited against SVCE generation charges only, because it's likely the customer's gen charges will be greater than that amount. So it helps, offset potential debt issues with SVCE. And this one's very straightforward to implement as well, no additional administrative cost. And then our final option, next slide, would be to do a rate discount. Interestingly, San Jose Clean Energy has actually done something like this for CareFira customers. And what motivated it was that their gen rate actually became higher than PG&E's. And they implemented a discount just for CareFira customers to bring that cost back in line with PG&E. So that was what motivated it at the time. Turned out this was a lot of work to maintain a separate rate for a large group of customers. As customers come and go, you got to make sure that the right customers are on that rate. It's complex from a billing standpoint. You have to set up some new billing mechanics as well. So their advice was, if you want to do this, you need to be really serious about it, and you're going to need to invest some time and effort, and it would cost us money with Calpine to implement this. Also, there's the notion of, does this become perpetual? You know, would this be something where perhaps there's an expectation that this discount is continued regularly into subsequent years versus being more of a one-time orientation like the credits we've done to date. So those are the three options that we've worked through. Next slide, please. We recommend that that option number 2 is probably the best of these three, to have a credit applied over a series of months. We're suggesting 8 months, which would be April through November, so much of the balance of this year, $12.50 a month, applied to the SVCE portion of the bill and offsetting SVCE generation charges. And if this meets with your approval and the board's approval, we can get the credits flowing as early as April. So I'll turn it back to the chair.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Don, for that presentation. Let's go ahead and questions or comments. We'll start with the board, and we'll start with Director Gibbons.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation and the analysis slides. That was very helpful. I support recommendation number 2. I also think it will help some of our customers understand that it's the gas costs that are going up versus the electrical costs, and might help them focus on what they can do to reduce their gas consumption.
Thank you for those comments. And Director Beltran.
Thank you, Chair. Also, thank you for the presentation. I wanted to, you know, just when you were talking, sorry, could you pull up that last slide? I'm losing my train of thought. Sorry. Yes, on the second recommendation, I'm wondering, is there any way that we could do that for 6 months or 5 months and make it $20 so that it just is a little bit more, you know, visual? When people see it, it has a little bit more impact to them. Is there a reason that we went with the 8 months?
This is completely your option. I mean, we're flexible on this. That the 8 divided evenly into 100, or you know, didn't leave us with a really strange number. To your point, 5 divides in nicely too. 8 would mean most of the months through the remainder of the year, so April through November. But yes, we could certainly contemplate 5, or really any combination you think makes the most sense.
Okay, great. I would love to see maybe a $20 credit, but you know, that's the only comment I have, and whatever you decide, I'm fine with. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Beltran. And I see CEO Beltran's hand up, and I'll just comment first to say, I think one thing we might consider is, when do we think the next rate adjustment by PG&E might be? And so that's, I look and I think, if we think it's around November, it'd be kind of nice to bridge to that, but I have no idea what the answer to that is. So with that, I'll hand it to you, CEO Beltran.
Well, that's exactly the point I wanted to make, which is, we expect, if things go according to schedule, January 1 would be when PG&E would have new rates. So that's kind of our general thinking of having this bridge right through December. So that's the point here. But again, we could go, that was the thinking behind the 8 months.
I see. I don't see any other comments or hands raised from the board members. Let's see if we have any from the attendees.
Here, can I just qualify then, or clarify then? So, yes. Girish, are you saying that that rates would go up in next January, or is it that we just don't know?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of, we don't know. As you saw with this cycle, there are lots of ups and downs. Like in this cycle, PG&E, the PC postponed the rate implementation to March 1. So in a way, they're going to collect the money through next over a 12-month period. But there's going to be another process that gets layered on top, which says January 1 is the new rate, and they're going to meld the two together. So whatever they didn't collect this year and next year's rate will be put in place in January. Now, it's not common for that January 1 deadline to be met. So these higher rates that we have for our customers, I think will most likely keep going even past January. So it may be January, February before we get to know the new rates. So that's kind of like the soft trade-off we were looking at. It's how long do we want to have that one line credit on our customer bills? So.
Okay.
Thank you. You know, and this class that I've been taking, it just reinforces how high California electric rates are compared to the rest of the country. And so there's going to be a lot of continued pushback. I can't predict which way they're going, but I just know California is very high. And that's before, I think, even seeing the rate that's just going in now. Let's see, I haven't gone to attendees. I don't remember, did I go to attendees? I haven't seen any hands raised. And so I'm going to say it doesn't look like we have any public comment. So just coming back to panelists then, we've got the proposal in front of us. We've had the suggestion of making it more of a 5-month than a $20. And do we have any other comments? My own inclination is to stretch it out a little bit, and it'll just be a nice little bonus to see in somebody's bill for 8 months is a nice thing, you know, rather than the joy of $100 and then nothing. So I see some psychological value to that, but that of course depends on each person's psyche. So anybody else wish to speak on that topic? And I'm not seeing anything, so I'm just going to suggest, why don't we just go ahead with this proposal for the full board and see what reactions there are. And I hope you've gotten enough feedback for that presentation.
So I think one question would be, should it be a board item versus maybe a consent item with a recommendation from the, I don't know, Grace, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we would prefer that this be a consent item. There's enough policy issues going on here. I think the board was very clear last time about the 3 million, and you've kind of, you know, provided comments. So that's our preference.
I see. Well, let's go with Vice Chair Flagger. Go ahead with your comment.
With all due respect, Dodd and Gurish, I think it's worth, because if you put it on the consent, I imagine it would get pulled because of the last discussion we had on this. And I think the presentation was great. I just think we should allow for discussion in case anyone has questions. And it's so policy heavy. I'm more in favor of putting it on the discussion calendar versus the consent calendar. And maybe you won't get any questions. I think it's very clear and you incorporated a lot of the feedback, but that's my suggestion.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And then Director Gibbons.
My thought was to put it on the consent calendar, and if there were questions, it could be pulled. So I'm fine either way, but I think everyone, the presentation and information is quite simple and clear. And I thought if anyone wanted to pull it to change the duration, that would be one thing. But I was very with the presentation material to leave it as consent item.
Okay, great. And Director Alahi, let's hear from you.
Yeah, good discussion. And I guess my question would be, how long is the agenda for the next board meeting? Is this something, I mean, would it help to have it on the, would it make no difference if it's not on the consent calendar, or do you have a lot of other stuff to cover?
Well, we do have the mid-year budget. We'll be talking about reach codes, doubling down on decarbonization. The contract with CC Power that was approved this morning on long duration storage, that will also be on discussion. So we have a few meaty items there.
All right, yeah, I would agree with Chair Gibbons. Put it on the consent calendar, and whoever wants to pull it off can always pull it off.
I think that we have that flexibility. So let's just do that. Okay.
And it's fair to represent the option 2 as a recommendation, or that the executive committee supports that recommendation.
I
Yes.
think you can say that, yes. Mhm. All right, with that, I'm going to say that I'm going to hand over the gavel to Vice Chair Flagger, and please don't let it get to your head. And I'm going to wish everybody well. We've had a very productive discussion so far, and I think we're going to have we're going to tee things up for a very nice board meeting.
Yeah, was that on the consent calendar or handing over the gavel?
No, she has no option of consent or non-consent, so that's how that's going to work. So with that, I'm going to say so long, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, former Chair
Thank you,
Dyson.
Chair.
Kidding.
Vice Chair, Vice Chair, we did have this item as an action on our calendar, so I'm not sure if we would like to take a formal vote.
On item number 5.
Correct.
Well, let's do that. Thanks, Andrea. So I'll look for a motion, and is it direction to approve it with maybe the suggestion for staff to consider the suggestion made by Director Martinez Beltran? Is that what the motion would be?
I would make a motion to move it forward as staff has presented.
As staff has presented without any additional changes. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion.
I so move.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Moved by Director Gibbons and seconded by Director Elahi. Andrea, can you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Flagger,
Yes.
Director Gibbons,
Aye.
Elahi,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran.
Yes.
Thank you. And that motion carries with Director Tyson absent.
Thank you, Andrea. And I think he already covered public comment. So let's move to item number 6. And I think Director Padilla is presenting on this item. Are you there, Monica? There she is.
Yep, I'm here. We have a short presentation. I'll make it really, really quick. All right. So the request is a delegation of authority to the CEO to make certain amendments to the PPA. You go to the next slide, Andrea. So again, many of you may recall that we've executed several PPAs or power purchase agreements, and recently the board authorized us to execute our first long duration storage agreement or energy storage service agreement for Tumbleweed. And so these contracts are all in various stages of development. Some are existing resources, some are new resources that are being built. One actually came online next month, but they all have their unique circumstances and issues associated with them that require us to manage them in different ways. We go to the next slide. So some of those management or administrative things are quite ministerial. And when the board authorized or gave the delegation of authority to the CEO to execute these, the board also authorized the execution or development of associated ancillary documents. But there was somewhat of a limitation on what types of changes the CEO could affect for these types of PPAs and ESSAs. And so they were mostly intended to be, again, operational or ministerial. But given what we've learned since we've executed these agreements, the amount of changes and potential changes that we could have, I think we need an expanded authority for our CEO. So next slide. So, just a few lessons here, and I won't go through them all, but, obviously we've had some changes in start dates due to delays. Outside of the control of the developer and obviously outside of SVCE's control. And we've also had some costs associated with implementing some of these agreements that we did not anticipate. And in some cases, the delays have resulted in situations that we didn't contemplate under the power purchase agreements. For example, when projects come on late and there's two components of it, like solar plus storage, we have the ability to bring one of the components on first, that is the solar or the PV portion, but not the second component. And so the contract didn't really contemplate that. So we've had to make some arrangements with the developers on how we'll compensate and how we'll manage that effort. So these are just some of the examples of things that have come up, but we anticipate other different things to come up for the different contracts as we develop them. Next slide. So one of the things that is important or crucial for us to be able to bring these projects on as quickly as possible is to be able to return and provide certainty to our developers that we can in fact make the necessary changes to implement these PPAs. And so sometimes, the process of coming back to the board for these changes may be more time than that is allowed in order to affect these changes in a quick manner. So that's kind of why, that's the main reason why we're asking for an expanded delegation of authority to the CEO. Next slide. So, but we don't want carte blanche here. We want to have some limits on the authority that the CEO has to make changes. The board, when they approve these PPAs and ESSAs, they approved them with certain understanding of value and deliverables and not to exceed amount over the life of the contract. So what we're asking for here is that an expanded authority be given to the CEO within these guidelines, that any amendment shall not exceed the term of the existing PPA or ESSA that the board has approved, that any amendment shall not change the price under the PPA or the ESSA after the delivery term starts without board approval. That pricing amendments to the test energy could be allowed if it's in the CEO's best judgment to provide the best value to SVCE. So here, the CEO will have to determine the trade-offs of providing some relief on test energy to the developer in exchange for being able to maintain the contract and have it come online as planned. Any amendment shall not cause the not to exceed budget amount that was approved by the board for the PPA or the ESSA to exceed that limit. And the CEO will provide timely updates to the board when we make these type of amendments to the agreements. And so this will be done via CEO report or a specific report to the board, letting them know that we had an amendment that was outside those ministerial operational amendments that we contemplate under the PPAs. So I think that's my last slide, Andrea.
Thanks, Director Padilla. That was a very clear presentation, and I really appreciate you outlining what the recommendation is and the different elements. So I'll follow the chair's model of doing both questions and comments at the same time. So I'll look for virtual hands. Any questions or comments on Director Padilla's presentation? Director Gibbons.
Yes, thank you. I liked the way there was a summary of what the limitations were. That is the most important thing for the board to understand, the parameters of which this flexibility is giving, and also understanding why things, because they're so dynamic, and we're learning about the dynamics, but we're putting parameters. So I thought that was well done.
Thanks, Director Gibbons. Anybody else? So I actually have a question, Monica, on the second bullet under the recommendation with regards to pricing. And I may be by myself on this, but I'm actually comfortable giving delegation to the CEO to have flexibility on pricing, because with everything happening in the market and with supply chain, I can see that also being something that changes quickly, because I think we're protected with the not to exceed the budgeted approved amount, even if we do any changes with the pricing. So I'm curious if there was a specific reason why you're also introducing this limitation on pricing.
Yeah, I think it's in part because of the NTE, the not to exceed amount that's in the authority. And so that is our primary kind of limiter here. So for us to be For us to have like a blanket authority on price would mean we'd have to have a blanket authority on the NTE on the not to exceed amount. And then also we have to send, the right signals to the developer that we don't have, that once a contract is executed by our board, they are our decision makers here. And that we as staff don't have the authority to renegotiate these contracts. We understand that there can be trade-offs sometimes and that there are things that we need to be able to be open to negotiate. But at the end of the day, the board is the one who approves these contracts. And that's something that our developers have to understand as well, that it's not an easy decision for us to make. So I don't know, Garish, if you wanted to add anything else to that.
Yeah, I think just to clarify your question, Director Fligor, were you talking about being comfortable with delegating some price movement as long as the not to exceed is not exceeded? Okay, yeah, so I think,
Exactly.
okay. All right, so I think that would be within the parameters of what we're thinking about. Yeah, and I think that would go hand in hand also with what Monica just said, which is if you're going to delegate authority, it should be limited authority, and anything more than a not to exceed, we have to come back to you. And I think that would be a signal also to our counterparties.
No, and I think especially Monica's second point about, saying to the developers, we don't, this is what was approved. And so this is where you're limited. I think that is an effective strategy. The not to exceed, whatever flexibility you had with regard to pricing would still not exceed that NTE amount. But Monica's explanation about why, that authority regarding pricing should remain with the board made a lot of sense. Okay, I don't see any more hands, so let me go to the public. Andrea, do we have any members of the public who would like to comment?
It doesn't appear so, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll bring it back to the executive committee. Any final comments or questions from Monica or Girish? Okay, seeing none. Andrea, is this also an action item? Do we need to take a vote to recommend this to the full board?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So with that, I will look for a virtual hand for someone to make a motion for that recommendation.
I'll make the motion to support the staff recommendation for the CEO to be able to take the identified actions.
Thank you, Director Gibbons. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Director Elahi. So we have the motion by Director Gibbons, seconded by Director Elahi. Andrea, can you please call the vote?
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Fliger?
Yes.
Director Gibbons? I see you're unmuted, Director Gibbons.
I'm on mute. I'm on mute. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Director Elahi?
Aye.
Martinez Beltran?
Sorry, aye.
Thank you. And that motion carries unanimously with Director Tyson absent.
Thank you. Okay, next on our agenda is our committee staff remarks. And let me start with the committee members. Does anyone have any remarks or announcements or comments? Okay, I don't see any hands. Girish or staff, any remarks?
Yeah, just you all are really tied into this, but the Santa Clara County Health Officer talked about the indoor mask mandate most likely going to be lifted on March 2nd, and it'll be a strong recommendation versus a requirement. So we are working with our general counsel. We are reaching out to the city of Cupertino to see not just when we can open up our offices for a little bit more staff in office work, but we'll also be bringing you some options about our board and committee meetings. Obviously, the board meetings, if we come back to physical meetings, would be in Cupertino City Hall, and committee meetings would be in our offices. So we're just working through some of those protocols. So just more of a heads up that it's something we're just starting to work on.
Thanks, Girish. Anything else? Last call? Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. And I will adjourn the meeting at 11:40 a.m. Thank you. Thanks, Andrea.
Good first meeting. Have a
Thank
good
you,
week.
everybody. Take care.
Thank you.